In this video, I'm gonna discuss long-term side effects of weight loss injections, the science and truth about creatine, the science and truth about electrolytes. This one's gonna piss people off. And if we have time, also discuss some tips to lower cholesterol and how to stay consistent with a calorie deficit. What's going on? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're doing a Q&A from my Instagram. If you don't follow me on Instagram, you can do that here. The first question, we're gonna do creatine first. This one is going to, I'm sure it's gonna light some people up. It's from Sony 1991. Good year, I was born that year. What year were you born, Mitch?
85.
85. All right, 85 was a good year too. Sony 91 said, your take on creatine. Now, I have a very unpopular take on it, but I wanna give you some context first. I very much view my role in the fitness industry as a way to bring balance within it, okay? The fitness industry runs on a pendulum of extremes. It's either the best thing for you or the worst thing for you. I try and balance things out. So I'll start with this. Creatine has some very positive benefits and some very positive uses for it. Number one, it does seem to be overwhelmingly safe, which is super important for you to know. The current research to date, which is overwhelming, there's a huge amount of research on creatine, is that it's very safe for the vast majority of people. It also has very clear benefits for muscular strength, especially for maximal strength. I'll talk about that in a second. And it also has some benefits for cognitive benefits for your cognition from a potentially a prevention of Alzheimer's perspective. I'll talk about that as well. There are some real benefits that can come with creatine, even some potentially heart health benefits too. Having said all of that, the reason that I'm gonna go the other way with it is not because it's bad and not because I don't think you should take it, but because this question specifically about creatine is the most common question that I get every time I do a Q&A on Instagram. And I get hundreds, sometimes thousands of questions every time I do a Q&A. And for me, it blows my mind that the most common question, that's not hyperbole, it's literally the most common one, is what are my thoughts on creatine? Should I be taking creatine, something of that sort? When the reality is the vast majority of people have not been strength training consistently at least 3 times a week for 5 years. The vast majority of people have not been consistent getting high quality sleep at least 7 or 8 hours a night for 5 years. The vast majority of people have not been consistent with their nutrition, super high quality nutrition, appropriate caloric allotments, appropriate protein and fiber allotments for at least 5 years. The vast majority of people are not consistent for at least 5 years. And in my mind, if you haven't been consistent with your strength training, with your cardio, with your steps, with your sleep, with your nutrition, if you haven't been consistent for at least 5 years, you shouldn't be talking about supplements. And that's my opinion. If you disagree, that's fine. Creatine shouldn't be the #1 question, in my opinion, because the vast majority of people are not doing what they need to do before they start thinking about creatine. If you've been strength training for 5 years consistently, and if you've gotten your at least 7,500 steps in a day consistently for 5 years, and if you're being super consistent with your nutrition and super consistent with sleep and super consistent with hydration for at least 5 years, yeah, I think creatine is a really, really good option. If you want to speak to your doctor, look at your blood work before you go on it, amazing. But if all of that is figured out, I think it's a really, really good thing to take for the vast majority of people. If you are not being consistent with anything else and you're like, maybe I should be taking creatine, you've got your priorities mixed up. Now, I do want to set some, not ground rules, but expectations for what I mean by creatine is very effective, especially from a strength perspective. When you start taking creatine, first and foremost, it's not a steroid. You have creatine, you ingest creatine when you eat steak, when you eat eggs, when you eat a number of different foods. Your body naturally makes it. It's not a steroid at all. When you take creatine, the effects that it could have on your maximal strength, it's not like you're gonna go from bench pressing 100 pounds to bench pressing 200 pounds. It's not like you're gonna get jacked and bulky. That's not how it works. Let's say you bench press 100 pounds for 5 reps, all right? Just an example. After your stores get saturated, you might go from bench pressing 100 for 5 to 100 for 7, right? You might be able to do a couple more repetitions, maybe 100 for 8, which frankly, it might sound insignificant, but it's actually not. It actually is very significant because if you can do more repetitions at this heavier weight, then over time that compounded leads to significantly more strength and pretty significant more muscle over time. Again, not slabs and slabs of muscle, and it's not gonna make anyone a world record lifter, but especially if this is something you're really passionate about and you've been consistent with for many years, those gains can be substantial and make training a little bit more fun and enjoyable. But for the average individual, it's just not that important, and especially if you're not being consistent. And for what it's worth, I haven't taken creatine for years, and I've been overwhelmingly consistent with my training and nutrition and my sleep when I can, when it's difficult with kids, but I've been overwhelmingly consistent, and I haven't taken it for years. Now, I have taken it previously, especially when I was a competitive powerlifter, but at this point in my life, it's just like, it's another thing to think about about, and I don't want to waste my mental and emotional energy on it. It's a great thing to take if you're being consistent, but don't think it's going to turn you into a world record lifter or make you super bulky or any of that. It's an effective supplement that has a time and a place, but if you're not being consistent first, it's not going to work. Next question is from Laura Watson 2733. What are your thoughts on electrolytes? This one's gonna piss people off too. This is actually really important because while creatine has been shown to be safe for the vast majority of people, electrolytes have very, very real dangers associated with them if you overuse them, if you take too much, or if you don't need them. I feel very called to talk about this because so many fitness influencers nowadays, and even not fitness influencers, influencers in general, are using their affiliate codes to tell people that you need to drink these because they're getting paid on the back end of it. I should actually say this, like electrolytes are essential. If you don't have electrolytes, you die, but just because they're essential doesn't mean you need to supplement with them. And if you take too much of them, which many people are, then you can get very, very sick and potentially die. I made a post about this recently on my Instagram of nurses talking about some really horrible things that they've seen in the emergency rooms as a result of regular everyday people taking too many electrolytes and having major issues with them. And not even necessarily taking too many, but supplementing with them when they didn't need them. What I'll first say is I'm gonna outline some people who could benefit from taking them, and then I'm gonna outline people who should not be taking them. The main people who could benefit from taking electrolytes are number one, endurance athletes. If you are an endurance athlete who's working out for hours and hours and hours and putting a lot of mileage in and sweating a lot, electrolytes, supplementing with them makes a lot of sense. Again, and this is all assuming you speak with your doctor first. Now, because you need to replenish those electrolytes. Other people who it might make sense for are potentially pregnant or breastfeeding women. Might make sense to be supplementing with electrolytes. If you have low blood pressure, it might make sense to be supplementing with electrolytes. If you are a manual labor, if you work manual labor and you sweat a lot during your work, or if you're working in a very hot environment like Arizona, somewhere in the desert, it might make sense to supplement with electrolytes. It is not for people who have high blood pressure already, and it's definitely not for people who are just recreational lifters, recreational workouters who are working out in an air-conditioned gym and just trying to drink more water. If you're drinking electrolytes just because it makes your water taste better, but you're not actually sweating a lot, it's very dangerous. Whether it's excess sodium, which can have massive negative effects on your blood pressure, whether it's excess potassium, hyperkalemia, major issue, excess magnesium. These are things people don't realize, they don't pay attention to because they're just listening to their favorite influencer, maybe not even their favorite influencer, maybe just some influencer who's saying, look what I take and you should take it too. Meanwhile, they don't realize the influencer is getting paid on the back end every time you buy from their link. And the influencer, I guarantee you what's gonna happen over the next 5 to 15 years, this is gonna be a longer term thing. We're gonna see a major, not a recall from the government or anything, but we're gonna see major people who are in the fitness industry or influencers who were once pushing these electrolytes en masse. They're either going to quietly stop pushing them, or they're actively going to come out and say, oops, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that, because they're now facing consequences as a result of people taking them without actually consulting their doctor first. Again, like I said, they are very important. They're actually essential for life, but just because they're essential doesn't mean you need to supplement with them. And most people are getting more than enough through their everyday diet, especially if you're not sweating on manual labor or an endurance athlete. If you're thinking about taking electrolytes, do not take it lightly. Speak with your doctor first and get your blood work taken. Next question is from Van Chessa. Do you think Ozempic or weight loss injections will have long-term side effects? Yes, I do. There's no question about it. Now, I want to discuss those with you. Before I do, my opinion on weight loss injections might surprise you. I have a whole separate video explaining not only my opinion, but explaining the science behind them. So simple a 5-year-old can understand it. The link to that is in the description of this video. If you want to go watch that, I'd encourage you to. Long story short, they're incredible for the people who need them, and they shouldn't be used by people who don't need them. But for more in-depth scientific information, click that link and watch the video. For long-term side effects, I'll start by saying we don't know yet definitively what they're going to be, because it's too soon and too early on to really know what the long-term side effects are going to be, which is why it's really important to be very cautious with what you choose to do. Like I spoke about in the video I linked, if someone has a very high body fat percentage, the negative effects of having that very high body fat percentage will be way worse, in my opinion, than what the negative effects or potential negative effects of weight loss injections will be, which is why I think these are truly miraculous drugs, because they give someone an opportunity who might otherwise never lose that body fat, an opportunity to get the benefits, the health benefits, and never mind the mental, physical, emotional benefits that come with it of maintaining a healthier body fat long term. That doesn't mean there won't be negative side effects, and we can discuss them in a second, but I think the worst thing is having excess body fat, a large amount of excess body fat for a long period of time, chronically. So with that being said, I think one of the major side effects of weight loss injections is not going to be directly because of the injections, but because people don't know what to focus on, is going to be a significant amount of muscle loss. Just because you take weight loss injections does not mean you will lose muscle, but without question, when you take weight loss injections, you will, the whole point of them is to reduce your hunger. And if you're not eating enough protein, you're gonna lose your muscle. You're gonna lose a lot of muscle, which is why it is unbelievably important, if you're taking a weight loss injection, to 100% prioritize your protein intake. And obviously, strength training. That should go without saying. I know many people will not, but if you're not having enough protein and you're not strength training, that's a big fucking problem. If you are getting your protein and strength training, even on a weight loss injection, I don't think you're going to see a substantial muscle loss, if any, as long as your protein intake is okay and your strength training is okay. But with the radical reduction in hunger and people not prioritizing their protein, I think it's one of the major side effects that's going to be a big problem for many people, especially as they get older. Now, like I said, we have a lot more time and a lot more research we have to go through to understand what other physiological side effects there are going to be. And we already know a bunch of the short-term side effects, which I discussed in that video that I told you to watch, and it's linked in the description. I think another potential long-term side effect is going to be more psychological or emotional as opposed to physiological. And I sort of relate this to ADD, ADHD medication like Adderall, coming from myself, someone who used it, as well as many friends and family members and colleagues who've used Adderall or other medications of the sort, where they basically feel completely dependent on the medication, and they feel as though if they stop taking it, then they can't be productive. They feel as if they stop taking it, then they won't be creative. They feel as though like that medication gives them the magic, and without that medication, then they won't be able to do what it is they currently do on the medication. And this is one of my big fears of weight loss injection drugs, which is if someone goes on them and then they decide they want to go off, it might not be that they don't know what to do. It might be that they're so scared that they need these drugs that it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy that causes them to go back to where they were previously. Now, again, this isn't physiological, this is more psychological, emotional, but I think it's absolutely worth discussing and being aware of as someone who might use them, and why it's so important to understand, number one, not using the drugs without education. You have to educate yourself while you're using them in terms of proper nutrition, proper portion control, all of that. As you're doing it, also learning which foods fill you up for lower calories to help you stay consistent if you decide to go off them long term, because as we all know, one of the major issues is, or one of the major things these drugs do is they reduce your hunger. So if you then go off of them and your hunger comes back, what strategies do you have in place to minimize that hunger or keep that hunger at bay? Those are probably, in my mind, the two major long-term side effects we're gonna see: loss of muscle and then feeling dependent on these drugs. I'm sure more will come out over time, and I'll have to keep an eye on them and an eye on the research, and I'll update you as they come out. Okay, so for the last two questions, we have Dancing with Coffee said, what are the best ways you suggest to lower cholesterol? And C. Polzinski said, I feel like such a failure. I can't commit to a deficit for more than a month. I'm gonna answer both of these questions and more in our next Q&A video here on YouTube. So if you like this video and if you want to see me answer those questions, please make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you get a bell when this video goes live so you can watch those videos and hear those questions answered. If you want me to answer your question, follow me on Instagram and make sure that when you look at my story and I put up a Q&A box, you put your question in and I will do my best to answer all of them here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching. Again, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. Have a wonderful week. I'll talk to you soon.